Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Center, sponsored by, I was going to say Small Church Connections, and that is right, here in Canada. And this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action podcast. Today, we have the great opportunity to hear from someone who has been in the same church for over, well, I think it's around 30 years. Is that right, Calvin?
It will be 30 years in December. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
and not only small church, this is a rural small church. And I love the name. I love the name of the town that you're from. Tofield, which sort of really is. We just go to the field, and so we call it Tofield or Tofield. Okay, you've probably heard that one before, but yeah. Okay, so Calvin, I'll let you introduce yourself. What's your name? What's been your ministry journey over the last while? Well, for quite a while. Yeah, take it away.
For quite a while, yeah. So yes, Calvin Andringa. I have served in 3 churches since 1986. First church, right out of Bible school. It was a small church in St. Paul, Alberta, and the church was about 3 years old when I got there. And it was maybe 35 people, and over 5.5 years it grew to about 70 people. It was a great first ministry. Actually, rural churches are great. You get to know people. I just did a funeral about 2 weeks ago of one of the fellows that was an elder in my first church.
Oh, really?
90 years old, and he was still involved in ministry and all sorts of things. It was just kind of neat to have that privilege. So that was kind of neat. Really good ministry there. And then the district superintendent said, well, there's a church in Wetaskiwin that has been struggling. Would you come and consider being pastor there? Initially, I was really not excited about that. We were expecting our second child at the time, but I did. And we got there with a group of, Wetaskiwin is a small city, about 10,000. And we got there, it was a group of about 20 people. And I say over the course of 2 years, we lost about 40 people, and we ended up with 20 people, and we closed the church in 2 years' time. So that was an interesting journey there.
We may need to venture into talking about that, but yes. Continue on.
Yeah, so that was about 7 years into ministry, something like that, a little over 7 years into ministry. And we moved to Tofield. And Tofield is about a half hour out of Edmonton. So as small as rural churches go, it's one of those connector or corridor kind of communities. And it has an interesting dynamic because you get the established rural Tofield, you get all of the acreages between Tofield and Edmonton. And Tofield itself is 2,000 people, where there's acreages and another 2,000 plus on acreages between here and Edmonton. And so we moved to Tofield, and I have been here for just about, it will be 30 years in December. And so this is the places I've served. And the church here has been, I've served many years in my ministry as a solo pastor. In 2006, we were at the size and stage, we got an associate pastor, and we had an associate pastor from 2006, and then a transition, another associate pastor for a few years. And then in 2019, our associate pastor moved. And we were about to look at hiring, and then a pandemic hit, and that changed the picture as to what we're doing. And so I've been back to a solo pastor for the last 3 years now, or coming on 3-4 years. So I've done both solo and having someone on a pastoral team in the time that I've been here in Tofield. So that's sort of in a nutshell the ministry experiences that I've had. Yeah.
Okay, let me just take a side tangent here. What did you find with the pandemic coming out of it now? Have you found that attendance is different, participation is different? Is there anything that you would say off the top of your head, hey, here's something that has happened?
It took a while for things to recover. Like many churches, our attendance dropped, and we had actually just experienced a drop in the transition after we lost our associate pastor. And there was a significant demographic that we had a number of youth, and that group kind of grew through when they went off to college. And so there was just a change in the families, and people that used to have 6 people coming in a family now have 2, and that happened with more than one family. And so we had notched down in attendance quite a bit. And but attendance is starting to recover, and we're seeing some young families come now, and some new people that are starting to get involved. And so we are continuing. We are there's momentum growing. It took a while because coming out of the pandemic, everyone was tired, and so volunteers were getting volunteers on board and going. Everyone was just trying to get ramped up back up, and so it was it's taken some work, but we are seem to be in a momentum zone now again. So so we're good. We're pleased with how things are going. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, take yourself through the 30 years that you've been pastoring. What kind of experiences? I mean, you've already talked a little bit about the attendance rising, the opportunity to bring in another person.
Yeah.
Any other things that you would talk about as you've gone through this last 30 years?
Well, I know in the question you framed it said, what's been experienced pastoring the same church for 3 decades? And I say, well, I pastor a different church every 4 or 5 years. It just happens to be in the same place. And because it is.
Okay.
The church changes.
Yeah.
The church changes an awful lot. I've seen the church grow. I've seen the church plateau. I've seen the church decline. I've seen the church begin to grow again. We've changed buildings in that ministry time. We've changed from being a solo pastor to having someone else on staff. People change in their stage of life. And we change in the ministries that have the highest profile, and we're given the most attention. And so there's an awful lot of change. And so while it's the same church, there's maybe a handful of people who were here in the beginning. The church when I got here was 12, 13 years old. And so it didn't have a long history, but of the time I'm here, I look at the list of our people and who's involved and who's in the director, and there's maybe half a dozen that were here when I began. So there's been a lot of change, and you change in leadership, you change it. So there's in saying it's the same place, yes, it is, but it's definitely like anything. There's a lot of change. Yeah. So.
Okay, I could go on another tangent here, but I'm going to go to the next question, and then maybe my tangent will come up once again. But can you speak to staying fresh in a long-term pastorate? I mean, yesterday I was with a pastor who just talked about getting bored every year or so, and he tried something new. And how do you stay fresh?
Well, in staying fresh, one thing is be connected. Be connected within your community, but be connected within a peer network. Some have the opportunity to do that within the community with other pastors in the community. Sometimes you have opportunity within a peer connection within a district. I've been involved in a peer network group, and some of the people have been in that same group for 20 years. Really? And we have gotten together. Yeah, we have gotten together, not quite monthly, but almost monthly. And sometimes it's just for the connection to talk about ministry together, to pray together, to be able to, just do life together in a way. And sometimes it's for learning together. We'll pick up books together and make sure, read them together and discuss those. Sometimes we've worked together on planning a preaching series. And so we've done let's work in an Advent series together. And we've done that, and each done some work and done that kind of thing. And so that's been kind of neat. And actually, we are looking right now within our district of churches of moving those peer networks to being more peer coaching. And so that's something I'm looking forward to now. So be connected in that. I've also been connected within the community, within a ministerial, within the community. And I've developed good friends within that. And so reach out and don't do the, you may be in a small place, but find a way not to do the solo kind of thing. Make sure, even if you're a solo pastor, don't be solo. Do things together with others. And part of the experience of being in a small community, you do get that opportunity to go deep with people. You have people that have been with you for many, many years. And I know I've got the experience where I've done a wedding for a young couple, and 25 years later, one of their kids is one of our worship leaders. And that's kind of neat, to be able to have that longevity, and that puts a smile on your face kind of thing. And other families, You have experiences with them through the years. I have one family that I call it the 4 funerals and a wedding, that within that extended family that becomes, I have done 4 funerals and a wedding for that one extended family. And so you get that opportunity to go deep with people. So go deep with people and continue to do that. But staying fresh, keep reading and keep learning. Take seminars, take courses, take another degree. I mean, I understand I went to ministry with an undergrad degree, and then 10, 15 years ago, I did CREST leadership and said, I'm going to take a master's of leadership course. And that is a very good, and CREST is one of those courses that's designed for midlife leaders. And it was just very good and very timely. And I've always been a reader. I like to read widely in various areas, you know, whether it be church stuff or whether it be other stuff. So read widely. Reading is really, really critical to be able to read. And another thing I would say is have an interest beyond the church, beyond the ministry setting, and that's been helpful. And that'll change through the years. For back in the time when computers were kind of new and exciting, before they came just these boring tools that keep us chained to technology. But we're close enough to Edmonton that I was involved in a group that I like Mac computers because I've had them since 1986. And there was a group that before everything, yeah, before everything was on the internet, how did you find out about these things? Well, it was a user group. So it was a user group for computers, and then later a user group for computers and music. And I'd go in once a month to this group. And it's nice to be part of something where you don't have to be the leader of it, where you can just show up and be part of the group and part of the group experience. And so do that. That's really good. Right now, in this stage of my journey, just before pandemic, I picked up on something I haven't done seriously for years, and that is playing trumpet. I grew up in the Salvation Army, so I played a brass instrument growing up. And in 2018, my sister, who lives in Leduc, said, "Hey, I'm playing in a community concert band. Why don't you come and join?" So I started that, and we had to pause during pandemic, but I still do that. And so I have this group that I can go to and just be part of the band and play a trumpet and have fun that way. And it is good to be able to have that as a rhythm of life, have something that's apart from your from the demands and the work and the pressure and all of those kinds of things. So have something that you just kind of are doing life and have an interest in that. So those are, I think, were a few of the things that to be able to stay fresh. Those are pretty important. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's ask the question. What books have you been reading lately?
The Myth of Normal. It's a book by a Canadian doctor and I always forget the author's name. I always have to look it up. But he's a Canadian doctor, and he is in the Vancouver area. He's probably retired now, but he specializes in trauma and addictions and chronic pain, and his own journey growing up in Hungary in World War II, and some of things that happened in trauma as a very young child. And he sees the addictions and some of the anxieties and some of the chronic pain as being very much linked to trauma. And it's interesting because it's not a faith perspective book, but some of the things that he talks about almost mirror some of the things on soul care kind of principles, was figuring out what some of the lies that you that have taken hold of you, and being able to deal with those. So it's really fascinating in seeing a medical approach and how people are dealing with whatever some of the past hurts and things like that. Now, of course, in faith journey, we've got the spiritual side to that to be able to do that. But it's interesting that book. So that book, another one, The New Copernicans, is a really good book.
Oh, I haven't heard of it. Okay.
You haven't heard of The New Copernicans, Ron? That's a great book.
I know. I can't believe it. I write my own books, so it's
well, that's
why read others. Yeah, no.
New Copernicans talks about the church and the emerging generation, and talks about how the emerging generation is falling off as far as the church, and there's not a lot, people aren't tracking with the church, and what I like about the book is that he doesn't just say, oh, this terrible new generation coming up there, how do we fix them? They're so entitled or whatever. That's not how the book goes. What he does is he says that the new Copernicans, they experience things differently, and their understanding of what a good life is actually far different than the boomer generation. And he says to be able to connect and do church well, we have to understand that. And he says, actually, the emerging generation, it is in some ways a necessary corrective to the boomer generation and the things that have been so affected by the whole Enlightenment and being tied into that whole scientific worldview where everything is locked down and everything is very, very certain. He talks about how there is a growing awareness of an openness to the transcendent, even in most scientific fields, to say that there's an openness to say there's stuff that we don't understand. And so being able to hold things more lightly and to recognize in the emerging generation that it's not a snapshot of where they may be looking at things and asking some questions, but they're on a journey. Recognize it's a journey, not a snapshot. So it's a really interesting book. And yeah, so
that would be well worth reading. Yeah. I'm going to put in a plug for a book I've just been reading called The Solo Pastor, which is a few years old, but another one that I handed to a young pastor who's just come into pastoring, and the sort of things that happen in church. And he's reading it through and he's saying, oh yeah, I know that. Oh yeah. He's been almost a year in ministry. He says, I ran into that. A really good book on just the practicalities and the things that happen when you're a solo pastor. Very, very interesting. So yeah, loved it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, which
pastor is unique.
Yeah. Which brings me to this next question that I had down for you, which is, I think in one sense, the almost most important thing for a solo pastor is, what does it take to gain trust in a small church? And how do you maintain that trust?
Sometimes it takes, you just have to be there long enough that people don't expect you're leaving right away. Because when a church has had a succession of pastors that in 3 to 5 years, like clockwork, they move on. And if you have people that experience that an awful lot, sometimes you just have to get past that threshold. But I think a part of gaining trust is you need to show up. You need to show up, and you need to just be there with people, and being able to come alongside people and work alongside people and show up. In a small church, in a solo church, you're going to get all sorts of invitations to all sorts of things, from birthday parties to whatever, that things are happening in people's lives. And sometimes there's a pressure in that because you can't fit it all into your schedule. You just can't. And but you show up and you say, I think it's Andy Stanley has the phrase, do for one what you'd love to do for all. And so you take it as it comes, and you say, yeah, I can jump into that. I can show up for that event, for that part in the people's lives. And so that's important to be able to do that. Don't be mailing it in. After you've been in ministry for a while, you've got a certain amount of skill and things like that, but keep putting the work in to stay, to be able to do things very well. And people recognize that when you are actually really engaged in what you're doing, where it's not just, it's another message and I'm doing, and it's rote. So keep pretty engaged in that. And
you don't recycle your sermons.
No, I will redo a series on a particular, on a particular book of the Bible, but every time you do it, I can't just take a sermon I've done a number of years ago and say, okay, it's good to go. I rework it because the connection points are different where people are at in their lives. I'm different in how I'm engaging with that text of what's happening in my life and my world. And so it really becomes, culture has changed. So how does it change? How does that whole topic or text, how does that intersect now with our culture? So there's a lot of work you need to do to be able to look at the same text and say, what is this saying to now? Because it's discerning the Spirit. And just
you're bringing a big question that I have is the matter of context. You've been 30 years in the same church.
Yeah.
What was, how would you say the context has changed in Tofield over 30 years? What is different about your congregation and the people, the people that you work with, the community? What has changed?
Mm-hmm. In Tofield now, when we got here, there were probably more people that were rooted in the community. And now we have people that are newer to the community. And so a greater part of our church is people who are newer to the community than it once was. So that is a difference. Another big difference, and this is something that all churches have to deal with, being close to Edmonton, being a commuter community, that's a huge deal. And commuting has changed because now we have people that they work in Fort McMurray. So there's more and more work there's more and more work that people are gone for 2 weeks and back for a week, or gone for 2 weeks and back for 2 weeks. And that is significant because how do you connect with people deeply when people show up less frequently? And even beyond the work, and I think we've seen it in church culture a lot, is that people just aren't there as frequently. I mean, I grew up in a context where kids would get prizes for being in Sunday school 52 weeks of a year, right?
You better believe it. Yeah.
When I was growing up. Yeah. So now Sunday school doesn't run 52 weeks of the year, and people are gone. And people who are your faithful, regular people, they sometimes are there on maybe half the time, maybe twice a month. And people are gone for work. That's one dynamic, because more and more work is expanded over that takes the weekend time. People are gone for play, whether that be there's people away on holidays, people are involved with community stuff, whether it be community sports, recreation, all of that's expanded over Sunday. People are gone more for family. People are just more mobile, and their families are spread out, and they'll be gone to visit family. And you learn early in ministry, you can't compete with grandchildren, right? People when people have grandchildren and they have their things that are doing, they're going to be gone. And how do you connect and deeply when people are there less frequently? That is a real question that we've had to struggle with, and how do we do that? And so your ministries, ministry used to be, you could just do that program and say every Tuesday, this is going to be this ministry. You're going to miss a lot of people because it's not going to work for them. So how do you be able to minister with people in such a way within the rhythm of their life? And you could say, well, it should be, and people should be there. But my wife and I like saying we sent some scouts out to the mythical land of should, and they haven't come back yet. So we have to deal with reality and what's going on right now. So, and it's because you have to be able to connect with people in the reality of where they are. And that has changed an awful lot. Context. Small communities, particularly pandemic, and it's been growing. There's been a number of factors, and there's a lot of sociological studies to say why is this, but the polarization. There are there used to be a lot more people were pretty well on the same page. They had the same church background. They sung from the same hymn book, as it were. Now, people are so different in where they are and how they approach on all sorts of topics. Political, certainly. Pandemic topics, certainly. There's such variety in where people are at in what they want in music and worship. We've got it's all over the map as to where people are, and there isn't the same core of experience or expectations, and so there's a lot more differences. And so keeping people together is important, and dealing with that context-wise. It's easy to jump to one end of the spectrum or the other and say, oh, this is an important point. We really have to camp out there. But it is so important to be able to say, the important thing is connecting people to Jesus. The important thing is helping people to come to Christ and grow in Christ. And some of these other questions, they're going to be passing questions. And so we need to be able to chill on those a little bit. We also need to be able to make sure that we listen well to people. And it is very easy to sort of write people off and to say, oh, well, they're kind of in that camp. And we sort of put a label of them on it, and it's whatever it is, whether it be in theological ideas or whether it be in political kind of things. We can sort of put people a label on and put them in that camp, and they're the them. And then we just don't listen to them. We don't value them. It's so important to keep listening and to keep valuing people, because it's everyone, you can learn from anyone. And most people have some pretty interesting stories when you get to know them, and you can learn from them. And there's the odd person that biggest thing you learn from them is they're a good example of what not to do. But most people, you can learn pretty well to say, this is, there's some really good life learning and life history in that. So that's a pretty important dynamic in being able to be in the context, recognize that diversity, and lean into it and say, what is making people tick, and how is their journey with Jesus going to unfold within that? Because no matter what a person's views are, there are some pretty logical, rational reasons that they arrived at those views. They might not be the same reasons that I have, and their journey is different, and their thinking might be different. But for them, they've got some logical, rational reasons they've arrived there. And so to be able to have that and hold people in honor, even when we really can't track with, what are you thinking? How do you get to that place? I mean, we might disagree. So, yeah.
Okay. I hate to say this, but I have 1,000 other questions, but we're pretty well done. And we got one last question that I want to ask. So here's the final question. What advice would you give to a small church pastor as they prepare? We've been talking a lot about our cultural moment in Canada. What would be your one piece of advice to that small church pastor? Yeah.
1A2. 1, live with joy, serve with joy. Joy has been a barometer in ministry. I mean, there have been opportunities to say, should I go here, or, should I change? But joy is the important thing. And I've told my congregation, and I've told my wife, if ever that I'm not enjoying and not being able to serve with joy, it's time to find something different. It's time to, whether it be another place or another kind of job. So serve with joy is really important. And related to that, as we're serving, understand your identity. Your identity as a child of God, and make sure that that's who you are and what you're doing. Because my identity is not in that I'm a pastor. And maybe that's one of the biggest things I learned when we closed a church and I moved here, is that, yeah, I'm a child of God first and foremost. And being a pastor is what I do for a living. And but being who I am first is a child of God. So make sure that that's really, you understand that and have a really good handle on that, because otherwise we can caught in that trap of their identity isn't what we do. And that can be a pretty vulnerable place. It can be unhealthy then when we do that. And so live as a child of God and live with joy, I think, are really some of the biggest advice to be able to be in. Now, whether that's a small or a solo or a rural, but I think that really certainly with a solo pastor, because it's easy to compare. It's easy to look at the big church or the other opportunities and be able to serve with joy. And so that's been helpful for me.
Mm-hmm. Great pieces of advice. Thank you, Calvin, very much for joining us on the podcast today. And we'll have to keep tracking with you. Some great thoughts. Thanks, Calvin.
Great. Really glad to be here.